Well, for more, we can speak to David Shulz. He's a political science and legal studies professor at Hamline University in the Twin Cities. Hello to you, Professor. I understand you were at the protest yourself on Friday, just as an observer. What did you make of the turnout?
The turnout was absolutely enormous. Again, point out the fact that it was brutally cold in Minnesota, and there were estimates ranging up to 50,000 people marching through the streets. And it was quite dramatic because the feeling in the Twin Cities, which is Minneapolis, St. Paul, Minnesota area, is of anger, frustration. It feels like the U.S. government is an occupying force for many people. And so this was an effort to push back, an effort to also show support for the large Somali population that is here. I mean, Donald Trump has described Somalians, his own words, as garbage people, but they're part of Minnesota now. So it was a real major effort for the people to say that we want to change the political narrative here, and it brought together businesses and people. And what's important about this general strike, it wasn't against businesses. Businesses joined in at it, which is a very unusual kind of general strike if you think about it.
But I'm also wondering, to what scale were these businesses taking part? Because on the one hand, you have local businesses agreeing to shut their doors on Friday. But what we also saw this week was a World Economic Forum in Davos. And JP Morgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon was sidestepping a question about whether there's a culture of fear for business leaders to speak out against the Trump administration. That got a round of applause because many people feel like business leaders don't do enough.
Well, clearly, the businesses that were closing here were, if I can call them, the family-owned, the sole proprietor, small businesses. The larger corporations did not close, but these were the smaller businesses that are very much connected to the community, and they're being very much affected by the ICE raids because it is ICE showing up at their doorsteps that are perhaps arresting employees, arresting customers, and so forth. So they very much are feeling it. But there's a tension here also, too, because on the one hand, the Minnesota economy, these businesses are already being impacted by ICE, and to ask them to close, to basically not do business for another day, took an incredible amount of sacrifice. Some businesses were asking people, don't shop, but maybe buy a gift card for a future date or something. But you're clearly catching an important tension that was here between, I would say, the smaller locally owned businesses versus the larger corporate, maybe multinational type of entities who could better weather the storm by closing, but oftentimes chose not to do so.
Yeah, an important distinction. And the tension you mentioned there, that could get even worse. This week we learned about a new ICE policy that allows its officers to enter homes without a judge's warrant. Does that violate the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution, which essentially protects people from unreasonable searches and seizures by the government?
Yeah, the Fourth Amendment for listeners is basically in our Bill of Rights. It basically says that that you need a judicially signed warrant issued upon probable cause to be able to enter people's homes. And ICE's interpretation in its memo clearly goes against over 250 years, almost 250 years of American law, and against well-established precedents. So their argument goes against what any legal authority, any U.S. Supreme Court, which is our constitutional court, would actually say. So it's basically wrong, but they're asserting incredibly broad amounts of powers that are in clear violation of of our U.S. Constitution.
Yeah, this week, the New Yorker had a piece on Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey, calling him the mayor of an occupied city. He uses the term yourself an occupying force with ICE agents there. Just how high are the tensions between public officials, local law enforcement, and the ICE agents themselves?
There's in general, there's a lot of tension, but there's an incredible amount of well, again, use that word tension and lack of trust at this point between local and national officials. Part of what's going on here and the argument, and our attorney general is raising this case in court, in federal court, is the argument that the Trump administration is essentially trying to coerce or force Minnesota into submission. Remember, under the U.S. Constitution, immigration matters are delegated to the national government, and that's their purview to enforce it. However, states are under no obligation to enforce immigration law. They can't impede, but they're under no obligation. And part of what the Trump administration is doing is, in many cases, forcing states like Minnesota, states that voted for the Democratic Party, not for him, to take a certain type of position that he doesn't agree. And again, we're a federal system. Under our Constitution, states have broad, independent authority from the national government. And the courts have said consistently that the national government can't coerce or force. And so that's part of the tension here. It's a political tension. It's kind of a Trump reprisal against our governor who ran as vice president against him. But it's a profound, let's say, constitutional tension that's really trying to force the state to do certain things. And that's where we're seeing the pushback. The state's saying, do your job, follow the Constitution, but you can't compel us to do your job.
Do you think the Trump administration is making an example out of Minnesota? We see a disproportionately large ICE deployment to the Twin Cities compared to other cities in America.
You're absolutely correct. If we look at the percentage of our population that is immigrant, it's very, very small by comparison to states such as Florida and Texas, which voted for the Republicans in the 2024 election. And so that's part of the retaliation. He's making us an example. And if you look at the other states where he had sent in ICE, California, Oregon, tried to do it in Illinois, all Democratic-leaning states at this point. So the pattern is pretty clear in terms of the reprisal, but this goes beyond ICE also. He's been targeting Minnesota, saying that by February 1st, he's going to cut off all the national or federal aid to the state of Minnesota, even though as a state, we pay more into the national government than we get back. So this is just part of a larger picture of what many people would say a reprisal against the state of Minnesota to try to make an example of the state in terms of, again, if you can use those words here, to coerce the state into following his direction. And it's going to probably backfire because it's really creating this sense of resolve, especially in the metropolitan area in terms of a pushback against Donald Trump.
Yeah, and it seems like the bigger the protests and the longer they go on, the wider population supports them. According to a YouGov poll published on January 14th, 70% of Americans saw the footage of Renee Good being killed. Over half of the people now view ICE unfavorably. At what point does the Trump administration reconsider its policies, its tactics?
That's a really good question because we have Renee Good. We have the story of the images. I think you showed it at the top of the story here of that 5-year-old being abducted. We also had a story of a 2-year-old being abducted. None of this plays politically very well across the United States. Now, how much has it moved the base? Donald Trump's hardcore base, I don't know, but certainly it's creating lots of problems among the independent voters and galvanizing Democrats. And right now, the Trump administration and clearly ICE seems to have the proverbial tin ear and not seeing the optics that are here. I don't know when it's going to end, when it's going to change, but clearly, remember, we have our midterm elections later this year in 2026, and these are the kind of images that are not going to soon go away at this point. So the battle's being fought through, let's say, popular media, through the images on television. It's going to be fought through the courts because, again, our attorney general and other groups are bringing cases, and it's going to eventually fought through the ballot box come November 2026.
All right, David. Thank you very much. David Shulz joining us from the Twin Cities. Thank you.